Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. I, of course, am Barney, and I'm joined with by my co-host today, who is
Jacob.
And we are very, very honored to have another guest with us today. This guest is someone that I have known for more than 20 years, but it feels like it's just been a few days. The time has just flown by so quickly for the time that we've been knowing each other. I'll let her introduce herself. Our guest today is
Lena.
And she and I met when we were together in Goshen. We were studying the same year in Goshen College, and met by chance through someone who was another friend of mine on the same floor of the dorm that I was living in. And just worked out. It's one of those things that worked out that we all became fast friends, and it has been a true blessing for me to be able to count Lena as a friend of mine, dear friend. Throughout our studies and whatnot, Lena has gone on and become a doctor, and we hoped that she would be able to share, especially a little bit about her faith today. I remember in Goshen, she was usually my convocation partner. I think we had to do maybe 20 convocations a semester, and it was always nice to have someone that you could rely on to go there together with. But they were always really fulfilling and rewarding, and so it was nice to have a good friend there with you, and also nice to be able to enjoy the content as well. I wanted to ask a little bit before we talk about your role as a physician. I remember the first time that I went to your house, I think your mom and your brother Mike were maybe working on some music for church, and of course in your family dynamic you have kind of a mixed culture, different cultures within your family as well, which is kind of another theme of our podcast here. And I'm curious, how are some of the influences that in your faith and developing your faith that you've noticed that you maybe gathered from your mom's side, your mom's point of view, or from your dad's perspective? Maybe both of those.
Sure. Well, first of all, Barney, thank you for the kind words and introduction. Growing up, my mother was born in Indonesia. She came to the United States when she was, I believe, about 14. She met my dad at Goshen College. So she, having been here since she was a teenager, was, I think, already pretty Americanized. And surprisingly, they were pretty much on the same page as far as faith things go. So I don't feel like that was very, something that was really a cultural difference growing up, as far as faith goes. My mom's parents did live with us for a time. Multi-generational homes are, very common in Asian cultures, some Asian cultures. So, that was maybe a little bit different, but they were always available, and them being in the church, I think were always available. So a lot of my faith was shaped by them growing up, just because they were there and they were the ones that taught me, largely by example, through their stories, going to church with them and just answering a lot of my questions.
And Lena, I think Barney was telling me when he was sharing a little bit about your background by email, pardon me, that he thought maybe one of your grandfathers had been a pastor. Is that right? Or had somebody been in ministry in one side of your family?
Yes, that was my mom's dad.
Oh, okay. Oh.
He started a lot of churches back in Indonesia, a lot of Christian churches, and Indonesia being a very Muslim population at the time were not too keen on that. So that was one of the reasons that they had to sort of flee to the United States to avoid some of the persecution they were facing there.
Did he ever share many of his experiences with being a pastor? Did he ever talk about what that was like with you?
He did. I was very young at the time, so I don't think I appreciated it as much as I would have, if he were still around today. Um, and he did write a lot of things down, but unfortunately, all of the things that they wrote down were in Indonesian, and I couldn't read them, and my mom has since gotten rid of them. So
Mm.
that's extremely unfortunate. But we did spend a lot of time together. He was my ride to school for a couple years, and he was always preaching. That was who he was. So I got to hear his opinions on many different topics during those times. Some of them more popular opinions than others, in this day and age.
I really liked how when you first started talking about that time when your grandparents were living in your home, you said that they taught you by example as well as by words. And so it seems like that had a huge impact, just observing them, how they lived, seemed to have a huge
Absolutely.
impact. Yeah.
Did you find that your family, in a way, was also kind of an inspiration for you deciding to become a physician as well, or was that more of a personal drive that you had?
Um, yeah, so my mom was a nurse, pediatric nurse, and I think she saw doctors or people in medicine as, a very prestigious career, something that was good and you were helping people. Um, and so she suggested that if I was interested in that, because I was always interested in what she was doing, that I work in a nursing home as a certified nursing assistant. So when I was 16, I went and applied at Greencroft, and they were like, "Well, you're kind of young." But they fortunately for me, they were a little bit short staffed, and they decided to give me a chance. And so for a couple of years in high school, I worked as a certified nursing assistant, taking care of Alzheimer's patients, and I really loved that. And I loved all aspects of that, caring for the people at the basic level. Greencroft being a Christian organization, there was a lot of faith that came through that experience as well. And then, it was at that point that I knew pretty much I'm going into medicine, one way or another. And, kind of with a lot of my mom's encouraging, that's kind of how it all started.
It's interesting how it was so meaningful for you to work there. My wife's father has Alzheimer's right now, and we've observed in our visits with him each time, changes and challenges, and that's kind of I wonder if that's as a challenging way to start in medicine. Did you? I mean, meaningful for sure. It sounds like it was very meaningful for you, but did you find it also challenging with patients particularly struggling with dementia and in terms of that cognitive decline and that sense of, do you have a sense of sorrow as you saw some of those patients struggling, or sure it was hard?
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. Yeah, I was a pretty shy kid. So, growing up, it was, always respect your elders, don't bother people. I was always more quiet in the background. And when I started working there, one of the first things that they told me to do was, okay, here's your list of people for the day. You will knock on their doors at, between 5, 6 in the morning, get them up, just walk into their rooms, bring them out and take them for a bath. And so, that was, first of all, very difficult for me to get over that, just, barging into someone's room at 6 in the morning and say, all right, we're going to get undressed and, go for a bath. And, um, a lot of them were very angry at me for that. And, one of the things with Alzheimer's is that I realized very quickly that if someone was angry or, aggressive with me, to just come back 5 minutes later, and they may have forgotten all about it. And then were then willing to come with me. So, challenges in that sense, and learning to read their cues and kind of try to figure out what mood someone was in, that, okay, should I come back later? Should I try to address this issue now? And try to manage the behaviors that way. It was a mobile Alzheimer's unit. So these were the people that were up walking around and were very active, not the ones that were laying in bed. So I also was given the task of putting together some of the activities and their church service on Sunday morning, because they knew I liked to sing and sort of lead in that way. So they gave me some of those tasks too, and that was also very meaningful.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's just amazing to hear the impact that your family and then this early job that you had on your life. How was it that you ended up going into family medicine as opposed to a different specialty or another line?
Yeah, so it's because I couldn't give anything up. Every rotation that I did in residency, when I was on the cardiac rotation, I wanted to be a cardiologist. When I was doing neurology, I wanted to be a neurologist. And at some point I realized if I want to do everything, that's the way to go. I can't, I like seeing, I like taking care of patients who are diabetic, 1 minute, and the next taking care of maybe some depression or, a different sort of problem or a painful knee, that variety and an opportunity to not just focus on one thing as specialists sometimes do. Oh, you're here for your knee. Let me fix that. Okay, you're out the door. Might not see you again. I liked that continuity of care, being able to get to know patients and to not only ask about their blood pressure or their foot pain, but also some of those questions like, how are you today? How really are you today? Because sometimes those were the things that were really at the root of the aches and pains and the high blood pressure. It might not be a physical problem as much as a stress, emotional, or spiritual problem.
I noticed in the bio that Barney shared before, as we were getting ready for today, that you mentioned enjoying getting to know your patients, building relationship, and also getting to know their family members, and kind of how they relate with their family, and how that's part of a holistic approach to helping them, is understanding that. I'm kind of wondering what you've learned about relationships from your time being a doctor so far, some key insights you've learned about people, or just how you approach building relationships.
Yes. So, one thing that I've definitely realized is that every relationship, every family dynamic is just so complex, and getting to know someone takes a lot of figuring out where they're at in their life, kind of having to meet people where they're at. And seeing that family dynamic is interesting in the sense that, once I get to know someone and realize what their problems are, what their stressors are, then getting to meet their mother or their children, and this light bulb comes on, and I just suddenly realize, okay, that's why you're like this. And it could be something genetic that I see, or, I see, the way people have related to each other, a parent talking to a child, or, interestingly, one of the things I find most fascinating is when I've been seeing two people for a long time, maybe 2 or 3 years, and not realizing because of different last names or whatnot, that they weren't connected until like, oh yeah, you see my daughter. Okay, who is that? And then I just have this aha moment, like, okay, now it all makes sense. Part of the reason you are the way you are is because you grew up with this person or that person. Another thing is that with COVID and the decrease in psychiatric assistance in our area, I've had to learn a lot more about sort of being a therapist and doing some of that kind of management. So learning how to motivate people, how to get people to recognize their own problems and maybe come up with their own solutions has also been a big factor in getting to know people, and making me a better listener, realizing that a lot of times the answer to a medical problem is right there in front of me if I can hear appropriately what the patient is telling me. I might have the medical knowledge, but it has to be communicated over in a good way, and having that relationship. I think, definitely having a good relationship with a patient allows me to better diagnose their problems, because I can hear what the problem is, and I can hear the unspoken, things and what's between the lines.
Yeah, it seems that on the one side of the coin of being able to be in work in family medicine is having the chance to see all of this wide variety of patients and cases and whatnot, but maybe the other side is maybe sometimes you run into a number of challenges or a number of things that maybe you didn't anticipate, or maybe just didn't want to have to deal with on that day or something like that. How is it that you, what are some of the ways that you cope, what are some of the methods you use to cope with things when you're having a especially challenging day like that?
A lot of times, fortunately I have a private office that I can go into and take a moment and close the door, have a few minutes of silence, and I will pray. I pray for the wisdom to take care of patients in the best way possible, and I will pray for the patients. I have a list of patients every day, and at the end of the day I'll go through that list and pray a little bit for each person. And the patients that are okay with talking about their faith, I will tell them that I do this, and they like that. But I think having that that time to sit and reflect a little bit and sort of regroup, I think is what puts me back on track. There are other days when I don't have the time to do that. It's one disaster after another, and especially being short-staffed with COVID. And lately there have definitely been times where I haven't been able to, and the coping mechanism has been put it in the back of my mind, work through it, and cry on the way home. So there's been definitely some of that too, but it has to come out one way or another. Fortunately, I have a 10-minute drive home, and can get a lot off my mind then.
I think it's really interesting how you talked earlier about the continuity of care, walking with somebody over a period of time, helping them. And I'm wondering, as you've done that, perhaps you've had some patients who you've walked alongside who have gone on or passed away. And as you talked about just now, sometimes you drive home and you have sorrow. It's been a hard day, or you wanted to help more. How do you process sometimes when you walk along someone for a season or multiple seasons, and then they go out of your life or they pass away, and that sense of you have to keep going as a doctor. You have more and more patients to see, but how do you process also the loss in the midst of that?
Yeah, that's hard. Especially lately, I've lost a lot of people to COVID, which has been a new experience because a lot of those people weren't sick before. It was, when it makes sense to me, spiritually, when someone has been sick or ill and they're declining and they're suffering. And in those cases, when they pass on, it's almost a relief to me. I don't like to see suffering. And another thing that I gleaned from my mom's culture was that death of someone who's lived a nice long life is something to be celebrated. It's a celebration because you're moving on to the next, the next better life. And you got a parade when you died. It wasn't a sad, mopey, but in some of these cases where someone was completely healthy, and then they get an illness that in many cases could have been preventable, and then they're gone. It's a little bit harder to process. And I run. I run 3 miles a day, and that helps me sort of get some of that energy, kind of be with nature. I do it outside, and sort of process those things. And I pray about it, and think about God's will, and what there being a reason for things, and some, I don't have the answer for a lot of it, but a lot of it is trust, and that faith that just trusting God.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's helpful. I think maybe people don't always realize when they go to see their doctor, and maybe if they've lost a family member and their doctor's been serving them, or if they themselves are struggling, maybe they don't always realize the emotional impact that the doctor would have too as a caregiver for them after they leave. And that was helpful to hear you share, open up about that.
Yeah, sure. It impacts us a lot. And I'm always glad when someone does pass. And, maybe I haven't seen them for a while because they declined in health and maybe ended up in a nursing facility or something like that. And, when a family member calls and lets us know that they've passed, or, gives us an opportunity to maybe go to the funeral or to a viewing, I'm glad for that. It's harder I think the hardest thing is when someone doesn't show up for their appointment. And I'm thinking, well, that's unusual. They always come to their appointment. So I'll look them up and there's an obituary, that to me, that's the hardest because, then I feel like I wasn't there. Maybe I could have helped them through this time, but, things happen.
It's just so fantastic thinking about the start of the episode and you talking about how the impact that your family and your extended family had on you growing up. And I think we can really see that the different ways that kind of situation impacted you in what you're saying today, and probably as how you work as a physician and as a parent and as a spouse. What do you think are some of the things that you're passing on to your kids right now?
There was a time because, being a physician and a mom, one of my regrets is that I'm not home as much as other moms. And fortunately, I have a husband who is a great stay-at-home dad and does an excellent job with that. But, I worried in the earlier years, my parents are up in Goshen. My husband's mom lives down in Florida, that my kids did not have that sort of spiritual guidance that my grandparents gave me. And I prayed about it and I'm just like, God, what am I going to do? Because I can't be available for my children, the way my grandparents were. And the next day, interestingly, we were at Barnes and Noble's, and I think this was when my first daughter was maybe 4 or 5. She walked in there, and the first thing she does is walk into the children's section, and she picks up a children's Bible, and she says, "This is the book I want." And I almost burst into tears right there because it was like God was listening and answered that prayer, and it was like he was, patting me and saying, it's going to be okay. So, I think part of it too is, like my grandparents were, being available for questions when they ask questions. And a lot of it is living by example. And I think example goes a long way. Even if I can't talk to them all the time, when things happen, when sad things happen, when good things happen, is living by example. And sometimes asking them questions, or when my daughter brings to me an anxiety or a fear, one of the first things I'll ask her was, have you prayed about this? And hearing her thoughts on it, and that she actually has been thinking about it in a big way, it makes me feel better. And I think even though I'm not home a lot, I'm able to do something in that way.
It's so interesting to hear you share about being a parent, and I wonder how the different parts of yourself connect. Like your role as a mom informs perhaps how you interact with young children in your practice. I'm wondering, and your faith formation impacts how you do both of those, and the interconnections. Have you seen that certain lessons you've learned from home life kind of bearing fruit in the workplace, or vice versa?
Oh yeah, it's all connected. Recently, and this happens frequently, but I was at a church service and the topic of the sermon that day was anxiety. And the pastor said some great things about anxiety. And I'm like, I can use this in my practice. So I went back to work, and, now I've incorporated some of those helpful things into the advice that I give to patients. And, vice versa. I think everything shapes the way I do everything else. It's just all interconnected.
Barney, do you have any other questions that you would like to ask before we draw our time to a close? Or for that matter, Lena, is there anything else that you would like to share before we would draw our podcast to a close that you have on your heart?
Yeah, there is one thing. I just want to make it clear that, I think a lot of people have this idea of what a doctor is. Back in the 40 years ago, at least from what my mom was telling me, doctors were considered, godlike because they did healing. They were in charge of your health. When a doctor came in the room, all the nurses got up and gave them her chair, or his, and thankfully it is not that way anymore. But I want to make it very clear that I see my job today as one of servitude, as a listener, of one who serves people, not someone who is there to tell people what to do. There is some of that, yeah, but as one who listens and one who serves, and does God's work. And God's given me the knowledge to do His healing work, through me. And I think it's that's one of the most important things to me to remember day to day, is that I'm a servant, and I'm there for God's people.
That's really helpful. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And Barney, I'm wondering, did you have a final thought that you'd like to share before we close?
No, it's just been such a joy to have Lena with us here today, and as much as we've been friends for so long, it's just so great for me to hear these new things that I didn't know about as well, and it's just been such a fantastic time.
I feel the same way. Thank you so much, Lena. What a joy it is. And it's also very inspiring to hear what you're doing and how, like you said, everything is connected in your approach, and your faith is bearing fruit in your family life and in your practice. And thank you for sharing your story with us. And we also want to thank you. And we also want to thank all of our listeners and viewers who are with us today. We hope that you have learned something new, perhaps greater insight now on what it might be like for the doctor, physician, specialist sitting across from you as they're helping to serve you. Maybe through Lena's experience, you have a small window into that. And we also hope that you would be inspired by her story as well. And so we thank you. And until next time, goodbye.